I am Jason Gorber for ThatShelf.com. We're here to look at Kevin Costner's latest film, Horizon, Part 1.
Big change.
So we saw here at Cannes International Film Festival, one of the screenings, the new Western from Kevin Costner, Oscar winner for the likes of Dances with Wolves, who has spent tens of millions of dollars in his own money. Not quite the $120 million that our friend Mr. Coppola spent, but putting together this giant Western epic. And one of the fun things about this film, and let's just call it a film because I saw it at a film festival on a big screen, is that by being part one, you know you're just sort of getting things going. Now, one of my favorite Westerns of all time is sort of a cheat is Deadwood. Deadwood obviously is episodic, incredibly rich, incredibly deep in the way that it's actually constructed, but very much designed sort of for the episodic small screen structure, but just a ton of characters and just loading all this stuff up. That's sort of, for me, peak TV. It's one of the greatest television shows ever, but it certainly is mandated for that kind of thing. Films, on the other hand, have often different narrative arcs. This is a 3+ hour part one, where we're introduced to all kinds of characters and all kinds of situations and all these different elements all colliding together in this really quite lovely landscape. I mean, it's Monument Valley-ish. You have indigenous confrontation. You very much see things from multiple perspectives in that. You are introduced to a bunch of settlers landing in this area called Horizon. Multiple different areas within that period of the West, the sort of Civil War era of the West, of the army getting involved about different areas, about the incursions, of the notions of manifest destiny. All these grander themes are playing out, but doing so in a way that feels incredibly inviting if you're interested in the genre at all, but equally completely free from any sense of irony or postmodernism or any of that stuff. This is a Western because it's a Western. This is not fooling anybody. This isn't trying to be anything else. And because of that, it's probably going to irritate the shit out of a whole bunch of people. A lot of people who will not give it time, who will be wondering about how the balance actually works out in terms of the narrative, about who's being paid attention to and who isn't, about whether or not we should care about these particular individuals who are essentially the tip of the American genocidal movement on the way west. All these grander issues are certainly there and discussed, or at least alluded to, but that is not the focus. This isn't even something like Unforgiven, which itself is a Western about Westerns. This is just a Western. And there's something, I mean, conservative is the wrong word because, I mean, it's easy to do it, but in the sense that it's this sort of uncut cocaine version of a Western. It's like this absolutely could have been in a different circumstance, one of the films of the 30s and 40s, or even some of the TV series, except done on a much grander scale with much more complicated, much more three-dimensional characters than a lot of those films actually did. And it's so clear that's the passion project of Costner and his collaborators. It's so clear that what he wants to do is to truly expand the scope of this stuff and just give this genre a peak. As he has pointed out, as others pointed out, we've had a ton of sci-fi stuff. We've had a ton of horror stuff. We've had a ton of these like foundational genres of the early periods of cinema that have continued, but one of them that was dominant for decades is the Western. We certainly had stuff like space Westerns in the form of something like Star Wars, just in the sense that we had space noir with things like Blade Runner. But nonetheless, I think in Costner's film, or series, or whatever the hell we're going to call this in part one, there's enough to actually keep you engaged. Now, who's going to go see it? I don't know. I think fans will actually enjoy it of Costner. I think they'll actually, he shows up very late, relatively late into the running time, but there's still, as I said, enough engagement actually at play here. I think fans of the genre in general. I don't know how many new fans it'll actually make of this sort of storyline, or at least the sort of visual language that it's actually engaging in. We will see. but it certainly will benefit from being seen on the big screen. So if it has the sort of sweep of the kind of thing that somebody will marathon as part of a series, but the scope of something that actually plays on the big screen, that I think is very interesting. Does it work as a standalone film? Well, that is also challenging because it kind of just ends. It doesn't really have a satisfying arc. Like, it feels like an intermission more than it feels like the actual cap of this particular chapter of it. Not helped by the fact that, at least at the screening we were at, there's a series of clips about what's to come, sort of teases of what's happening. So then that makes it feel even more episodic rather than the standalone. This isn't Godfather leading into Godfather 2. This feels like the first bit of a film, and then we're going to have to wait for a few months or half a year before the second part's actually shown. Obviously we only saw the first part here. I kind of would have enjoyed, I think, the full 7-hour experience. That would have been feeling very much like we're traipsing through the West ourselves. It will be interesting to see how this plays out. This is for sure a little bit of a boondoggle. My understanding is that he wants to do at least 3, if not 4 stories within this sort of world. We have this explosion of the introduction of characters now, but as it moves forward, you can see how the narrative lines will actually start interconnecting as people sort of converge on this particular area of horizon. And yeah, I'm excited to see where it actually goes. I think it is a noble thing, if not entirely a successful thing, and I applaud the fact that it's being done. I look forward to people actually asking the hard questions about this, but I equally implore those that are just blind to any of its charms or absolutely convinced that this can't actually be good, that it has to be by definition supremacist or all the other elements. I'll be very interested to hear other voices other than my own, but in general, actually exploring those elements, but judging it in its totality, not simply judging it by what sort of initial expectations are, or even just the first chunk. It'll be interesting to see how, when the narrative is actually fully played out about how all these storylines interconnect, that's when I think is the best time to actually decide about the dimensionality of some of these characters. I think that there's some interesting and hard truths that are actually expressed in this that go beyond not only the regular quote-unquote cowboy and Indian, the Native American and settler tropes, but also within different indigenous communities, within the Mexican element that's actually brought in here. All of these disparate elements are complexified within this in ways that aren't so groundbreaking, but nonetheless certainly show an attention to detail. Just like the visual detail, I think there's a narrative detail that's there that I am willing to, at least for now, recognize that having only judged it on the first part, I'm looking forward to see how all this stuff wraps up. So there we are, Horizon, playing here at the Canada International Film Festival. For ThatShelf.com, I'm Jason Gorber. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe, follow us on social media. We will see you next video. All the best. Take care.
Big Shelf.